He is a man of vision. He's also, secondly, a man of extraordinary faith. The faith to follow an invisible God. The faith to be ready and willing to sacrifice his beloved son to that invisible God. And finally, Abraham is a man of extraordinary complexity. He defends the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, but doesn't speak up for the life of his son when God orders him to bring him as a sacrifice. He is an individual of deeply held principles, deeply held morals, great morals, but not once but twice he tries to pass his wife off as his sister. What's going on there? He is the founder of a faith community, but he gets mixed reviews for his role as a husband and a father. And I'll close my remarks with, I think, one of the most poignant images of all, which is in next week's parashah, that extraordinary image of the death of Abraham at 175 years, and the poignant image of his two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, coming together in Hebron to bury their father. And I think most relevant for our conversation, interfaith conversation today, we have such a long and tragic history of violence and bloodshed between the descendants of Isaac and the descendants of Ishmael. There is far too much hatred. There is far too much violence. There are too many funerals on all sides. I would only hope and pray that we find many more occasions such as this when the children of Abraham can pray together, can learn together, can celebrate together. May God bless us in this holy task. Amen. Now, I'm very pleased and honored to call upon my very good friend, Najeeba Saeed Miller from Claremont School of Theology, to share her reflections about Abraham in the Muslim tradition.
So I asked Rabbi Mark if I get a rabbi's 5 minutes or I get real 5 minutes. So he said real 5 minutes, or professor's 5 minutes. So in the Muslim tradition, we use the word Ibrahim, which is very similar to Abraham, and whenever we speak of our prophets, we say alayhi salam, which means upon them be peace. So I have a hard time uttering the word Abraham without saying upon him be peace. It's a natural reflection, it's reflexive, it happens in I was raised with that, so we always refer to him as a prophet. So we have in the Muslim tradition, our scriptures, a whole chapter dedicated to Prophet Ibrahim, upon him be peace, and he's named several times. In fact, the prophet that's named most often in the Quran is Prophet Musa, or Moses, upon him be peace. So what does this chapter say about Prophet Ibrahim? It says, Salam, peace be on Abraham. Thus indeed do we reward those who do right. For he was one of the believing servants, and we gave him good news of Isaac, a prophet of the righteous. So that is how God speaks about Abraham and his contribution. It was through his own actions and the lineage that he was able to produce with his wives. So Abraham speaks in the Quran to God. One of the things that is fascinating about Prophet Abraham, upon him be peace, as a prophet, is that the conversations that he has with God in our traditions show him also to be one of the chief negotiators of his time. And so he speaks to God and said, "O Lord, I have made my offspring to dwell in a valley without cultivation by your sacred house. So fill the hearts of some amongst men with love towards them. Feed them with fruits that they may survive." So, interestingly enough, in the Muslim scriptures, it's not Sarah that is the one that asked for Hajra, that's Hagar in our tradition. It's actually Abraham himself who is asked to, or comes to the point that he understands that his wife is to dwell in as we see it, Mecca at that time. So Prophet Ibrahim says, "Praise be to God who hath granted me in old age Ismail and Isaac, for truly my Lord is a hearer of prayer." So he is also very fertile. That's another one of his wonderful qualities, which we are thankful for, since he was a progenitor of so many wonderful traditions. And so he speaks to God in a way that is thankful for hearing his prayer and the prayer of his family for children. And so the Muslim tradition goes on to speak about the story of Hajara. Hagar is not named in the Quran. The story of her journey is actually from the traditions of Prophet Muhammad. We use the Prophet's traditions as a supplement to the Quran. We look at them together. And that story is one that is remarkable for any of us that are a mother. I'm a mother of a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old who would have joined us, but then you wouldn't have had me up here. They're with their father, Jonathan. And one of the things that's remarkable is the story of Hajara is one that we commemorate when we go to Hajj. Hajj is the annual pilgrimage. It's the fifth pillar of Islam. We have 5 pillars that are the foundation of our faith, and one of them is the pilgrimage to Mecca. And as you go, there are 2 mountains, one called Safa and Marwa. And similar to the story that's in the Torah, she was without food. She had finished all of her provisions, and as any mother does in such a state, you cry and you pray to God, and your child is also crying. And so Angel Gabriel, I need to learn Hebrew because it's so. When I was in Israel, I was so surprised that people spoke. I could understand maybe 30% of what they said because I've studied Arabic. So it was remarkable. He comes directly. It shows the favor of both Isaac and Ismail and Abraham and Sarah and Hajara, that the angels were directly a part of the communication with them. So he strikes the ground, and there flows what we call Zamzam, which is a spring. And that spring, to this day, Muslims, when you go to Mecca, you run 7 times between these 2 hills. And what you're doing is you're doing the ritual of Hajra or Hagar, and you run. You don't walk, you run. You go with a level of anxiety and thankfulness and fear all at the same time, because you want to feel what Hagar was feeling in that moment when she didn't know if for any reason she might survive except for the bounty of God that came down. So that was one of the remarkable stories that continues, and when we go for Hajj, we do that. And last of all, we have the idea of Abraham as someone who believed in supreme sacrifice. The scholars, between Muslim and Jewish scholars for 1,400 years, we've talked about whether it was Ismail or Isaac that were sacrificed. In fact, what's often obscured is early scholars of Islam, and in fact, throughout the discourse of Muslim scholars, there has been disagreement about whether it's presented often as that it was Ismail, but in fact, there has been discourse internally in our tradition as to whether it could have been Isaac as well. That's an accepted viewpoint as well. I don't know if in your tradition you have any disagreements, but so. Yeah, that was a joke. But our scholars, our scholars have had a discourse throughout tradition, and I think that's very important to know as well. And to me, the story that I was raised with about Abraham, upon him be peace, the story of the sacrifice of his son was actually a lesson in nonviolence. That here was something that one was supposed to do that seemed in some ways a physical act, but in fact, in the end, we know it was a spiritual act. And that the greater service to God, as I was raised with these teachings, is that we sacrifice out of our soul, not out of hurting someone else. So that was the ultimate lesson that we learned from the sacrifice that was initially visioned in our minds as human beings. We have a limited vision of what sacrifice is. We think of it as a physical act, or an act that involves perhaps sacrificing an animal. But at the deeper level, the way that the lesson played out for Prophet Abraham, upon him be peace, and whichever son you choose, ultimately what's important is the lesson that comes out of it. Thank you for your time this morning, and thank you to Rabbi Mark Diamond and to this whole congregation for witnessing such a beautiful ceremony this morning.
Thank you, Najiba. Now I'm equally pleased to introduce another friend and colleague with whom I've worked for quite a few years and had the privilege of visiting Pepperdine University in his classes so often that I think they're going to have a named cot for me there at Pepperdine, my friend and colleague, Tim Pono.
Shabbat Shalom.